I'd like to talk for a little bit about our role as rebels in this movement and how utterly dependent fulfilling our role is on clear messaging. To deliver a clear message, we must dive into who we are not, and know to what audience our message should be delivered. I spoke a few weeks ago to a group of consultants and brokers and took the advice of FMMA's new messaging consultant, Tim Pollard, to begin my talk with a problem. Many advise beginning a speech with a joke, but I can't retell in mixed company any that I hear in the operating room. So once I had their attention, I said to the crowd of brokers facing me, "You all have a problem." So once I had their attention, I said to the crowd that statement, and then they staring at me in disbelief, I said, "And you're looking at your problem." Not very nuanced, but it was my first time to try out Mr. Pollard's advice. More and more buyers, I told them, are discovering better ways to buy from physicians and facilities directly without the carrier's involvement. And this is a problem for you, or an opportunity. You could have heard a pin drop for the remainder of my remarks, so I'm going to declare this speech technique good advice. What is the problem or the challenge of the Free Market Medical Association and of every member in this room? Mr. Pollard has advised us that we need to more clearly state how our solutions fit a buyer's problem. And he's right. Our messaging has historically had another problem. We forget that we are not revolutionaries who want to take over. We are rebels offering an alternative. Our challenges are to remember who we are, focus on our true audience. We are rebels, not revolutionaries, and this distinction will keep us on track. What makes you a rebel? If you're a member of FMMA, that undoubtedly makes you a rebel. If you offer market-based services to patients or clients, you are definitely a rebel. What characteristics do rebels in this movement share? It turns out that the characteristics of a movement rebel, that's what I'm going to call us, movement rebels, completely overlap the characteristics of an entrepreneur. You reject the prevalent economic model of maximizing revenue and embrace the delivery of value model. You subscribe to the golden rule and the concept of mutually beneficial exchange and are therefore financially empathetic with your clients or patients. You are collaborative, bringing in all who are needed to address a client or patient problem, pushing any pride aside. You are ethical. If not, you're out of business. You have a low time preference. This means you reject hit and run, get rich quick strategies, preferring happy and repeat customers and patients. You are creative. You have to be to present alternative approaches to problems. And you're apolitical in your business dealings. Many patients have told me that they could not disagree with my philosophy more, but they also couldn't argue with cheaper and better. There is too much divisive politics nowadays anyway, so it is good to ensure that this is not a point of contention with your clients or patients. We are fortunate in that we have a messenger brigade within our ranks, broadcasting our alternative to all who will listen. Kennedy, who keynoted last year, Steve Forbes, the year before, John Stossel, who saw the Reason video mentioned earlier that Jim Epstein created about what we were doing and had me on his show twice, resulted in this movement really taking off. Then there are those, here's another bunch, Larry Van Horn, the economist from Vanderbilt who actually wrote Trump's executive order mandating price transparency. Everybody knows Marty McCary in the middle and Dave Chase. These people are out on the front lines just screaming our message. There are those who not only deliver the message, but who also craft the very foundations of the message and some of the most articulate spokesmen that the free market has ever known. Lou Rockwell, if you're not familiar, you need to familiarize yourself with. Anything he's written is worth reading every syllable of. He's also the founder of the Mises Institute. Jeff Deist was president of the Mises Institute until about a couple of months ago. Is now part of a heavy metals investment firm. He's been a keynote and is telling anyone who will listen as not just a messenger, but actually talking about the very foundations of our message. And then the great Dr. Ron Paul, anybody that talks to him ever hears about the Free Market Medical Association and what we're doing, and has been in the past a great keynote. We are now in a position, thanks to the work of everyone in this room and those whose pictures were just shown, where refinement of our message is all that remains between this movement and its goal, the widespread availability of a market alternative in this industry. The tipping point is now here. So, are we as rebels trying to change the world? I say no. While changing the world is not our goal, it could certainly be a result. We are an alternative, not a replacement, a distinction the importance of which we must acknowledge in order to send the very clear and concise message we must craft. After all, the medical autonomy of the individual, our theme this year, rests on individual choice without the consideration of the needs of a health system or a government. I'd like to go back in time to explain when I began to first figure this out. In 1993, I stopped filing Medicare claims, as many of you know. I no longer wished to legitimize what I saw as an illegitimate system and liberated myself from their control. This did not go over very well with my anesthesia partners. Keep in mind, I did not stop seeing Medicare patients, I just quit filing claims. You're not going to change anything doing this by yourself, I was told. Exactly. I just quit filing claims. First, I wasn't trying to change anything other than my situation. Second, what if everyone stopped filing Medicare claims? I didn't want to change the world. I wanted to change my world. I didn't want to take over Medicare and change it. I just wanted to walk away. This was, therefore, a rebellious, not a revolutionary move. The early success of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma allowed many physicians to secede from their situations, whether hospital employment or overhead abusive group practices. Many of the surgeons Steve Lonte and I worked with were able to jettison abusive carriers from their practices. Did this change United Healthcare or Cigna? No. That wasn't the point of kicking them to the curb. The point was to improve one's individual condition. If anyone heard how much better our lives and practices were and wanted to copy us, they were free to do so. If not, fine. This is the difference between rebellion and revolution. This is the difference between broadcasting a clear message to our audience or a very unclear one. The realization that the carriers and the government will never change is a tough one for most in this industry, physicians in particular. To know that nothing in the system will ever change is to know that you have to do something, or just be a slave. If I don't do something, this will never change is far too frightening for many to face. To meet others who have liberated themselves, to converse and network with other rebels is what makes gatherings like ours so energizing and inspirational for all who attend, isn't it? Have we not all seen the look on the face of a first-time attendee here when they realize They are not insane as they've been told. Indeed, the growth of this association has occurred one member at a time, a pure grassroots movement, and a movement to which many owe their sanity. This is our strength, and it is why collaborating with other members and helping each other comes naturally. When I posted online surgical practice prices in 2009, I did not want to change the world. It turns out this has changed the industry in this country, but that was not my goal. I confess, however, to being lured into situations where I entertained the idea that our rebellious alternative could revolutionize the government and the carrier world. Conversations with national legislators and policymakers, even my congressional testimony, I now recognize as mostly a waste of time. Coupling our market approach at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma to the state employee health plan in Oklahoma was a predictable train wreck. Montana copied our approach with their state government, and that has ended in disaster as well. Remember, we are an alternative, not a replacement. Lured to a seat at the table, I now see as the same as a bug drawn to the light of a zapper. Don't get me wrong, I don't fault anyone who attempts to influence policymakers. I just don't think that's the stuff that our rebellion is made of. Unlike the Free Market Medical Association, which has primarily targeted individuals, not groups, in its outreach, the Surgery Center of Oklahoma has historically targeted groups, not individuals, in its marketing and messaging approach. We should have known this strategy was flawed, not only because it was frustrating and didn't work very well, but because we had succumbed to the lure of the revolutionary rather than the rebel. Policymakers and many others had convinced us that we could change the world, and we fell for it. As a result, our messaging became muddy and confused and less rebellious. No more. We did an about-face 6 months ago and abandoned organizational outreach, limiting our outreach to individuals, and the results have been remarkable. As we'd hoped, certain individuals we reached just happened to work for a self-funded company whose management then heard about us from these newly minted rebel soldiers. What a nightmare for HR when the employees, red-pilled, had awakened to how unnecessary the yearly increases in their copays and deductibles had been. Individuals, not groups. The individual, not the collective. This is the strength of this association and the foundation of the clarity upon which our messaging relies. Now, not all time with policymakers is wasted. There, you will occasionally stumble upon some piece of intelligence useful to the rebel cause, like how they will next attack you. It is in these meetings that it can also become clear how powerless elected officials are and how completely the regulator class wields authority. Anthony Fauci and the rest of his brown shirt public health enforcers called the shots for this country, and when they had a chance, not Congress, not the executive branch. And we now know what world they want. We know what they want the world to look like, don't we? I learned recently from a seat-at-the-table guy about how industry support for Obamacare was accomplished. He noticed that initially, every seat at the table was in opposition. But every day, someone changed sides. The hospitals, they changed sides when a ban on physician-owned hospitals was offered. The insurance carriers Changed sides when the medical loss ratio was offered, as the predictable consolidation would result as the smaller players could not afford this ratio. Big Pharma changed sides when the Obama regime offered an FDA ban on foreign biologic drugs, declaring them unsafe, on which the FDA delivered. Spending too much time with collectivists, however, can cloud your rebel judgment. One of the favorite questions of the collectivists meant to mentally derail a free marketeer is, what about the poor? If you've succumbed to their perspective, then you will struggle with that question. If you're focused, you might say, the poor will find our alternative more affordable. Or, to paraphrase my partner Steve Lantier, when asked, what about the poor, respond as follows. What about the rich? They can't afford it either. What about the poor is the question of one who thinks we are all in this together. The collectivist trolls created this cesspool. They can swim in it. We don't have to. This mindset, the opposite of individual medical autonomy, comes from the flawed idea that everyone alive has a right to medical services. You could always point out that what about the poor is a question embedded in which is the acknowledgement of the failure of the government's solution to the plight of the poor. What we offer is a free market alternative, pure and simple, not a replacement. Is our alternative better than that offered by the state and their cronies? Of course it is, but that is a totally different conversation. Do you know who never asks, what about the poor? Patients or organizations who buy from the people in this very room, saving astonishing sums. They are concerned with their individual situations and autonomy and flock to those who can help them. They know what their problem is, and they know you are the solution. As rebels, we should stay in our lane and work hard on what we offer and not concern ourselves too much with the statist tyrants. Jeff Deist has suggested that we live in a post-persuasion world where no argument, however sound, will convince another who would deny your medical autonomy to change their mind. Revolutionaries who want to take the place of the cartel and just run it better have to argue with the naysayers. As rebels, we do not. Just as you should guard against sparring with collectivists, you should guard against philosophical Puritanism. Are you a judgmental, purist rebel? Are there not successful hybrid models conducted by rebels in this room? How many of you thought it reckless to join this movement utilizing anything other than a hybrid approach? That is certainly the story at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, where we cut our teeth in this business filing out-of-network insurance claims, discovering that our entire bundled cash price was usually less than the patient's in-network deductible. How many surgery centers post their prices online now, but also accept funds from the carriers and the government? Are they not rebels as well? How many employer carve-out arrangements for pharmacy services or dialysis or transplant services have resulted in an inquiry into what else can our health plan save money on by carving out the bucas? How many carve-out or bolt-on arrangements, as Jay calls them, have subsequently resulted in a full rejection of the carriers? Are these hybrid approaches any less rebellious than the purist model? I would argue that sellers and intermediaries who utilize a gradualist or hybrid approach bring more buyers to this movement than the zealots. Now, we zealots, while we have our place, can invite more skepticism and scrutiny than the toe in the water types, I think. At the risk of sounding too ecumenical, I want to declare right now everyone in this movement to be rebel scum. Atlas Billing Company, the Surgery Center of Oklahoma's payment clearinghouse, now regularly buys services from big box hospitals for great cash pricing. Even though these hospitals remain in the closet, are they not tasting this rebel movement? Is there no better way to bring them on board than to pay them for doing so? Let that soak in. Hospitals that tried desperately to crush the Surgery Center of Oklahoma in our early days are now vendors paid by Atlas Billing Company for referrals that I send them. They have kissed the ring of the free market, however unwillingly. And while we can entertain hybrid models without jeopardizing our rebel label, the other side doesn't have the same luxury. If a Blue Cross client discovers that Blue Cross has bamboozled them in any area of their plan, Blue Cross risks losing the entirety of their credibility with this client. No amount of the light of truth can be allowed. This is why unscrupulous brokers ferociously guard their clients, buyers, from direct conversations with sellers. If outpatient surgeries can be purchased for a fraction of the Blue Cross Blue Shield in-network allowable if purchased directly, how else might Blue Cross be ripping me off? An employer might ponder. This is the type of questioning no troll can survive. The last time I checked, ripping people off was still wrong. It turns out truth and morality are on our side. What a world we now live in where the rebellious represent truth and morality and individual autonomy. The power of the truth should not be underestimated. Entire governments have been overthrown once the liars were exposed. Armed with a clear message, we rebels should give serious thought to the composition of our audience. Who cares about what we offer? While my instinct and that of many of you is to sing our message from the treetops and tell every passerby what we are about, we must remember that more than half of the people in this country could care less about the cost of medical services. If you're on Medicare, you don't care. If you're on Medicaid, you don't care. If you receive your care at the VA or on active duty or receive care from Indian Health Service, you don't care. In addition, anyone who has a low deductible policy or who, for that matter, has met their deductible simply doesn't care after that. It's someone else's money. For all their belly aching, the federal government doesn't care. Not only do they not care, they do all they can to ensure that care for everyone is more expensive than the market would allow. Uncle Sam overpays for everything that is hospital-owned. The government that bails out reckless banks and sends hundreds of billions of dollars to corrupt regimes all over the planet can't say they care about the price of a physician's office visit and whether it was extensive or not. Who does care? Everyone with sticker shock who is paying their own bills individually and at the self-funded or cost-sharing ministry level. While there are self-funded companies and their administrators represented in this room right now, the vast majority allow a carrier network with an unscrupulous broker to steer their health plan ship directly toward the rocks. And while these large groups should be our audience, it is the individuals within these groups that are our audience. and we should enlist them as rebel soldiers in this cause, as their medical liberty and autonomy are at stake. I love our theme this year and what the Connections team has so creatively done with it. I was 16 years old when the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, arrived in theaters. My older brother had narrowly avoided being drafted into the Vietnam War, and so foreign policy and world events were on my radar as a teenager. My parents visited the Soviet Union about the same time this movie was released. Convinced that communism couldn't be as bad as they had been led to believe, they returned to this country assured that communism was indeed much worse than they'd ever imagined, and their lives, and therefore mine, were transformed. It was clear that the Star Wars movie was allegorical, the old Soviet regime represented as the evil empire, and the extremely disorganized rebels from all walks of life and planets representing the liberty-minded freedom lovers. I believe this movie, as a shaper of culture, helped pave the way for what was to come. 10 years after we met our first Jedi Knight, Ronald Reagan delivered his famous "Tear Down This Wall, Mr. Gorbachev" speech at the Berlin Wall. 2 years later, this man, Otto von Habsburg, Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary and a fierce opponent of communism in the Iron Curtain, came up with an idea, a picnic. Flyers were distributed all over the Eastern Bloc, promising food and money to all who made the journey. Von Habsburg's hope was that the Hungarian guards, unlike the East German guards, would be less likely to shoot overwhelming numbers of people wishing to escape. You can see bottom left, if they all got to Hungary, they could cross into Austria. His hope became a reality. These are actual photos. Thousands escaped, including hundreds of East Germans who surprised the Hungarian guards and crossed the Iron Curtain and into Austria with no shots fired. 3 months later, the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall were gone, dismantled by those whom it had enslaved. Had the escapees, not known of a better alternative on the other side of the guards, they would not have risked their lives at Habsburg's picnic. The knowledge of the existence of an alternative, another way of life, fueled their desire to escape. That is our advantage as rebels at this time in this industry. An increasing awareness of an alternative path, a better way, a new hope, is holding this industry to task in empowering an escape from the medical Iron Curtain. More buyers know of our alternative. More sellers are accommodating these red-pilled buyers. More intermediaries know that they can do well facilitating the buyer-seller exchange. This movement, this sold-out conference, is a manifestation of the power of our message. I believe we will look back on this moment in time as our picnic. Where our alternative will help many escape the iron fist of the cartel and discover their liberty. Thank you.